On today's Power Podcast, I'm joined by Brendan Duval. He is the CEO of the Glenfarne Group, which is a New York-based developer, owner, operator, and industrial manager of energy and infrastructure assets. So, Brendan, thank you for joining me, and if you don't mind, just kind of tell a little bit about your background and what Glenfarne Group is involved with.
Thank you, Aaron. Very, very nice of you to invite me on the program here this afternoon. So Glenfarne Group is a developer, owner, operator of infrastructure assets. We have our headquarters in New York. We have a strong office in Houston, Bogota, Colombia, Panama City, Panama, and Santiago, Chile. And Glenfarne Group focuses on energy and infrastructure assets in investment-grade Americas. So North America and the higher-grade quality countries in Latin America for investment purposes. We have two business units. One business unit is our power unit called Enfogen, and it's predominantly invested in Chile, Panama, and Colombia at the moment. It has about 1.4 gigawatts installed at the moment and growing rapidly. And then we have a midstream business headquartered in Houston, and it's got two legs to its business. One is a gas gathering business, and one is a development project for LNG export out of Texas. I've been running that business now. I started it about 8 years ago, and prior to launching Glenfarne, I moved from Australia to the United States to work with Macquarie in launching its infrastructure business nearly 20 years ago now.
Yeah, I figured listeners would recognize that you're not a native New Yorker with the accent. It's always fun to speak to people from Australia or England or anybody that speaks English that is a little different than the U.S. version. So it's good to have you on the show.
That's right, yeah. It's easy to pick up on. Thank you, Aaron.
So you talked a little bit about the countries that you work in, Chile, Panama. What sort of projects do you specifically develop or own and operate, or what's your special focus, would you say?
So in the Latin American countries, it's our power platform, Enfogen, that's operating there. And Enfogen has a renewables arm that goes by the name of Fontis, and it has a thermal power business, backup power business, called Prime Energia. And the Prime Energia looks at backup power plants, so power plants that are focused on supporting the grid when renewable energy is unpredictable or unavailable. We develop those assets from scratch. We buy assets that other people have owned. We are quite happy to and are quite expert in turning assets from a basic operation into an enhanced operation. And we also have bought assets that are perfectly well run, and we add them into the portfolio. So backup power plants, we think, are really important in the energy transition process as more and more renewables come online. Having well-run, well-put-together backup power plant network in any country is really important, and we've got a long-term vision for that, in particular for the countries that we're in that are attracting renewables rapidly that also have an existing footprint of renewables. If you look at Panama, Chile, and Colombia, they have a tremendous amount of hydro at the moment, and as they grow their solar and wind, more and more they need the flexible power plants that we like to own. So that's the Prime Energia business unit. And then we are also investing in renewable under Fontis, which Fontis is our renewables business, and it's focused on solar and hydroelectric operations. And so its main focus at the moment is Panama and Chile. And so, yeah, they're the businesses we like. We are very happy to work hard on development at early stage as needed and transition that through construction, commissioning, long-term operations. Yeah. And that's where we focus in the power in Latin America.
So when you talk about backup power, I'm guessing these are like either small gas turbines or maybe reciprocating engines. Is there a special type of model or something that you try to stick with, or what? How do you select your technology?
Yes, so I'd say that our first point of investing is making sure that the country has a regime that is supportive of flexible power plants. And there needs to be a regulatory regime, whether it's through contract or regulation, that supports power plants that may not run 24/7. And so we look for countries that have these capacity payment programs or availability payment programs. And then based on the dispatch profile that a project we're developing may have, the less likely it is to dispatch. We see the reciprocating engines being more flexible, and the more likely there is dispatch, gas turbines are more flexible. And then there's an overlay of what particular opportunity is available for us to invest in. So sometimes we're developing ourselves, and other times we're buying from other developers or other owners. And so we'll take a good look at the particular asset they've built and make sure it has the technical specifications and in particular the flexibility. With backup power plants, you really need to be able to ramp up the plant quickly and turn it down quickly when there's perturbations in the system. And as you pointed out, the reciprocating engines and the gas turbines have what you probably are familiar with, the ramp speed. And those two sets of power plants have quite attractive ramp speeds.
Right. You kind of mentioned what you look for in a country. Obviously, you selected Chile and Colombia and Panama. Are there other countries that you're also looking at or working with to get these capacity-type payments available to you, or do you just focus kind of on those three regions for the time being?
Well, they particularly Panama and Chile, Colombia and Chile, have very specific programs that the government has thought through and have developed them, and they're attractive for this type of investing. One of the overlays for us is that the sovereign credit rating of the country is investment grade, and preferably is also a member of the OECD. So Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, if you're thinking of Latin America, have that OECD criteria. And we think of Panama and Peru as emerging OECD, but they're still investment grade. Chile, Peru, and Colombia have programs in place that we've spent a lot of time understanding. We just haven't made an investment in Peru as of yet. Panama has a less developed capacity payment program, and so we don't have backup power plants in Panama at the moment. We have renewable assets there. And Mexico, we are yet to make an investment in, and so we don't have opportunities there at the moment. When we look further around the world, there are similar capacity payment programs in other parts of the world, but we're very focused on this time zone in the countries where we've built deep relationships, and we have very local teams. You know, our head of our Chilean business is a Chilean in Chile. The head of our Colombian business is a Colombian in Colombia. And so there may be more opportunities for our expertise outside of the region, but at the moment we've got plenty to keep us busy in the region.
So when you develop these projects, you have the two different arms of your company where you have the solar and the wind development firms and then the backup power. Do you try to merge them kind of together in project areas where your backup team can be backing up your solar and wind power, or isn't that really important to you?
No, we run them from a power supply and electron generation. We run them as independent businesses and independent plants. There is the opportunity to have some solar plants that are very close to or even co-located to our backup power plants in Chile. And in fact, we do have a plant in the north of Chile where the same operations team runs the backup plant and the solar plant. And actually, it's a very beautiful image taken from a drone footage to see the solar plant wrapped around the thermal plant. So we do see the more just a labor staffing synergy, but in general, we're not looking to sort of contractually link backup power plants with the renewable plants.
Do you see these as long-term investments when you develop a solar plant, let's say from ground up? Do you normally just have the intention of keeping that for 20 years, 25 years, or whatever the maybe you have power purchase agreements or whatever the situation is? Is it typically your scenario, or would you develop and then sell projects to other companies?
Yes, Enphrogen's business model, and I'd say Glenfarne Group's business model, is in general a developer, owner, operator. And so we develop the assets with a mindset that we're going to live and breathe the life of the asset through until, solar plants now have useful lives of 30, 35 years. They used to be 25 years. So when we map out our O&M and our CapEx plan and the quality of the equipment we're designing, the site selection, it's all with a mind that it's a long-term asset. And so Enphrogen is a long-term owner-operator of its assets, and that's the DNA of Glenfarne Group as well. So, yeah, there are other business models where a developer will develop an asset and then sell them at different stages of development. And we've got a number of relationships with parties like that as well. And so we're developing our own assets, but also other developers come to us and sometimes want us to invest and own the assets they're developed, and we're very open to that business model as well.
Yeah. And what about the hydro assets? Is that more difficult in some ways to get siting permits and all of the other background studies that need to be done in order to get one of those in? Or do you focus mainly on smaller projects where maybe there's not as much requirements as far as the land needs and things like that? Or what can you tell me about hydro development?
Yes, so run-of-river hydro has been a focus of ours, and generally smaller scale run-of-river hydro. And why do we like run-of-river hydro? In that generally you're not dealing with dam hydro, and for those who are familiar, the dam hydro generally is dispatched after the dam fills up with water, and you have a number of political pressures on a dam hydro where either it's being used to control power prices and or control drinking water and or agricultural water supplies downstream. In a run-of-river hydro project, we take the water out of the river for a kilometre or two, and then we put it back into the river. And in the meantime, its momentum spins our turbines. So we believe that the interaction with the local community, government agencies, agricultural requirements, the run-of-river hydro is just a easier asset for us to manage within the community. The development of run-of-river hydro in Latin America has really slowed down for a number of reasons. One is a lot of the good sites in the countries where development is preferable, they've been taken up over the last 20-odd years. As you point out, the permitting process in Latin America and all around the world for anything that impacts water flow has increased, the amount of time and the effort for that permitting. And then finally, power prices have come down so that developing new build run-of-river hydro, the economics are a lot harder than they used to be because power prices have come down. So when governments are now looking for renewable opportunities, they're looking for a lower price point, and they can achieve that lower price point with renewable sources by looking at solar and to some extent wind. So if you look at the dollars per megawatt invested, solar is the most cost-effective, then wind, and then run-of-river hydro. And the cutoff point now is really in that capital cost between wind and run-of-river hydro. So we were fortunate enough to buy a run-of-river hydro asset a couple of years ago that's got very attractive PPAs and has it's in a market that we think's got very attractive long-term pricing mechanics, being Panama. And so, unfortunately, we haven't been able to find more projects to develop or build for the economic reasons that I've described.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that from your perspective, most of the time the solar projects are the least cost option, next by wind and then hydro. So do you see that continuing going forward? Do you think solar is going to become even cheaper, or that wind is going to somehow make up some ground and become more competitive? What's your long-term forecast?
Well, eventually when you look at any installed equipment, industrial equipment, the analysis, and we do our crystal ball gazing like others, you can never get below the cost of raw materials for the particular facility that's being built. And prior to that, it's manufacturing processes that drive out cost. And what we've seen over time is the volume economics coming into solar and the lack of moving parts coming into solar results in less maintenance in solar. Whereas wind has just the volume of scale of wind, particularly onshore wind. I don't have a great experience with offshore wind. We don't do it. Onshore wind is harder to make the economics work, and therefore the volumes aren't as large, and the scale and manufacturing scale just hasn't grown at the rate that solar has. So the cost curve for solar's probably got some room to run. Wind is sort of plateauing out now. And then wind also has an operating cost that factors into its overall levelized cost of energy, where the maintenance of the solar plants is really quite minimal when you compare it to wind.
Mm-hmm. So when you go into communities and you're trying to develop a project, do the people usually want you to focus on a certain area, or how do you choose? Is it just based on economics?
So that there's twofold answer to that question. When developing whether it's a renewable power plant or a thermal power plant, it's very important to build relationships locally, regionally, and nationally. And so our starting point is, can we be considered an important member of the local community? And then secondly, is there a need for a project at that node or that part of the grid? And then thirdly, when we look at that, do the economics of site control and interconnect support, and if it's a thermal plant fuel supply, does it support the type of project that we want to build? But it all comes from a strong base of knowing that we're going to be a member of the community for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And so that starts with a relationship day one when we're first out there talking to landowners. And it continues on throughout all the programs we do during construction, development, and operations. And I'm very proud of our track record, and I keep a very personal close eye on all of the community work we do in and around our power plants. But yes, it's very hard to be successful in any part of the world, including Latin America, unless you take a long-term view of partnering with the local communities.
Do you see yourself getting into the U.S. market at all, or do you think you've kind of found your niche in Latin America?
Well, Latin America is a good place for us to be. Power prices in North America remain low, and the volume of investors that are happy to invest in North America are very high, and it's a very developed grid. And so the opportunity for us to get in and find new developments and leverage our existing relationships where we've got a differentiating factor, and the growing demand for electricity in Latin America is very different to North America. So we would have no problem being an owner-operator of an asset in the U.S., but when we think of return on time and return on dollars invested, we see just a better return on that time and a return on that dollar focused on the markets that we've got the power plants in at the moment. Over time, we could see having a business in North America, but it's just we're super busy and having a good time focusing on our Latin American footprint at the moment.
Yeah, I can see that you've kind of got the connections and you've made inroads into those areas, and I'm sure it's a benefit overall.
Absolutely.
Well, as we're recording this, it's April 17th, and obviously the coronavirus has many people in lockdown. How has that affected you and your company's ability to get projects done? Is it something that obviously has put a damper on things, or what's going on there?
So we built our business on having the right people in the right locations doing the right things. And so the first overlay of the coronavirus was having all of our office people start working from home. And so the use of virtual meeting software really didn't change our relationship too much because the volume of video conferences we would do anyway from New York to Chile or Chile to Panama, Panama to Colombia, we did a tremendous amount of that work. So when we had to send everyone home to work from home, really didn't change so much the way we interacted at a sort of a macro level. Now, our plant operators, we had to come up with a very important program to make sure they were safe and put some additional education, some protocols, some transportation, and even some of our operators volunteered to stay at the power plant and put some living quarters together. And I've reviewed that those living quarters, and they've done a great job in fitting them out to avoid having any risk of infection between themselves and their family for some of our more critical assets. So the operating assets, we came up with a program to get everyone on site in a way and backwards and forwards from their house with the least amount of interaction with potential virus. Our construction projects are in Chile, and the regions that we're building our plants in have not gone into shelter-in-place or lockdown. And so those projects continue construction. And for the projects that we're developing, yes, we'll see, I think, some delay in government permitting. And so we're factoring that into our equation as we move through some of the developments. There will definitely be some delay in permitting and whatnot. But our primary focus has been on the people that work with us and their families to make sure we're supporting them, and I think that's gone very well, and we've had very good feedback from everyone, from our construction team to our operating team to our corporate teams, and I get that update from those teams every week.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, a lot of solar supplies come from China. China was shut down for several months, and I'm guessing there's issues with getting materials in and out of the country. Do you see that affecting any of your projects and disrupting potential delays in getting jobs done? Would that cause financial disruptions? Any other things? And do you think this will be a long-term fix, or is this just kind of a minor blip and you think it'll pass?
Well, I think anyone who knows the answer to that is probably a smarter person than me, the actual answer. But as we look at it today, fortunately, any equipment supply or flow into our projects coming from China haven't been trapped on a sort of a critical path of where the project is up to. And so thankfully, the supply chain part of what we're doing isn't really going to cause us too much harm. Whether this is, and what we're seeing in China is that supply chain is opening back up. So that supply chain problem, we hope is behind us to a large extent. Whether this is a long-term or a short-term outcome for all of us, it's all going to depend on the volume of testing and the ability to find vaccines, and that's a very hard question to answer. The important thing is all of our assets are essential assets, and our construction's continuing. All of our operating assets are operating. So it sort of, there are some new ways of doing business, some new focus points for us, but it hasn't been a major disruption, and we're very fortunate. My heart goes out to the businesses and the types of businesses that have really been severely impacted by this crisis, and fortunately, the communities that we're in and the people that work for us, they still need their electricity and they still need to come to work, and so on both of those fronts, we've, even if it runs for a while, at least the business side of what we're doing is not going to be terribly impacted in the Latin American power business.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my last question for you is about how you decided to focus on these specific areas in renewables, solar, wind, hydro. Was climate change part of the equation, or was this all market-driven when you first envisioned this company and what you do? So,
Aaron, just one correction. We haven't done anything in wind yet. That's not to say we wouldn't, but we haven't done anything in wind. Okay. So it's just on the renewable side, hydro and solar. Well, look, I think like any business builder or entrepreneur, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, and the team members that you work with have to be passionate about what they're doing. So, particularly in our power business, but also in our midstream business that we have, we've built a team of people that really enjoy what they're doing. And if you take the power business, everyone is extremely proud of the fact that we are part of the energy transition process, whether it's putting in backup plants that allow nations to take on more and more renewable or directly investing in the renewable. Our team members go home to their families at night very proud of being part of this energy transition process. And so the energy transition process, yes, it's driven sort of at some level by climate change, but actually now it is just commercially a very smart decision to transform grids to renewable and back them up with backup power. So it's now becoming just a straight game of economics in most parts of the world now. And so we're following the business opportunity, but the beauty of when you start a business from scratch and you pick where you're going to spend your time, you actually have the ability to say, I want to do something I'm very proud of, and I want to make sure it's something that makes good money for the investors, and we're good members of the communities, and all stakeholders around are proud of what we do. So having built the business from scratch, fortunately, we had that opportunity to select that path, and it's been a good one. But in reality, we're really looking to drive shareholder value in a way that is long-term. And when you think long-term, you have to think of climate change. You have to think of the communities that you're in and how they look at climate change. And so it goes hand in hand. It's not a choice of being an advocate of climate change or an advocate of profitability. The two are hand in glove now, and we're a big believer in that. All of our employees, we've got 370 employees, they believe in it, and our investors know it's a fact. So it's not driven by one or the other. It's just good business.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job, and I think you've got a lot to be proud of. So is there any last thoughts that you'd like to mention before we wrap up the podcast?
Well, no, I appreciate you inviting me on, Aaron. I look forward to talking again in the future, and my heart and prayers go out to everyone suffering through the coronavirus. And as I say, touch wood that all of the community members of the Glenfarne community have remained relatively unscathed from it so far. So we're very thankful for that. Thank you, Aaron.
Yes, thank you, Brendan. I really appreciate it. I think it was an interesting discussion, so thanks for your time.